Good morning. My name is David Yankel. I'm a member of this church, and it's my job this morning to take pleasure in being able to welcome you all here. And we always want to make sure that we welcome our guests. So if you are new to the congregation or visiting today and wouldn't mind standing up and telling us who you are and where you're from, we'd like to hear from you. And if no one wants to do that on their own, if we have anybody that has brought somebody or met somebody this morning they'd like to introduce. Well, welcome. All right. Even if you didn't have the bravery to stand up in front of all these people you don't know, we still welcome you here today on this wonderful rainy day at All Souls. Going to introduce Anton Jacobs, who will be speaking with us today for our opening words.
Good morning again. It's nice to be with you all again. It's been a while. I'm going to be sharing several things. I'm not sure there's one running theme in what I'm going to share with you today. I'm sharing a lot of stuff with you just for fun from a book that I published last fall, a book of essays I had written over an 8-year period. I'll say a little bit more about that later. But I'll start with a few paragraphs from an essay I wrote in 2010 titled Everyday Grace. It says, the Kansas City Star's headline read, Teens Make Right Call in Roadside Discovery. And the article by Donald Bradley told how 8 teens recently graduated from the Smoky Valley High School in Lindsborg, Kansas, found a purse alongside the road that contained $7,000. And they returned it. It's true that human history is too full of human beings doing terrible things to other human beings. For ideological and personal reasons, we've done things to one another that should make us blush before other species. But it is also true that human societies carry on day in and day out with their members simply living honest, law-abiding, generous, and cooperative lives. And the sociologists have taught us that society is held together not so much by law enforcement, but by our sense of solidarity and our willingness to go along and get along and care about one another. At a book club meeting of ours, and a book club we share actually with Janet Alvey and John, some years ago at one of the book club gatherings, Janet introduced us to the book Amish Grace, How Forgiveness Transcended Tragedy, by several authors. It's a story of the 2006 murders in Pennsylvania of 5 young Amish schoolgirls and the wounding of 5 others by a deeply disturbed man from outside the community who then killed himself. The book explores the Amish community's amazing exercise of gracious and forgiving actions in the aftermath. As our book club discussed these events, I thought about all the things that every one of us in that room had surely had to forgive in the course of our lives. These were not necessarily the deep, excruciating tragedy of the murder of loved ones, but slights, offenses, and injustices over the years. And I thought about those who had forgiven us our trespasses as well, and it struck me, society is maintained by grace. I realize that social cohesion is not only a matter of people cooperating honestly with one another, it is also a matter of forgiveness. If every person were intent on exacting revenge for every slight, every injustice, every offense experienced in life, society would be a nightmare without end. But the vast majority of the time, people simply lick their wounds and move on. Society is not an endless nightmare. That is the clue that indeed we all live by grace.
Good morning. My name is Khalil, and I light this chalice for the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all.
And if you'll stand with us for our song, For the Earth Forever Turning.
Sing we our joyful song of peace. For the mountains, hills, and pastures in their silent majesty. For the stars, for all the heavens, sing we our joyful song of peace. For the sun, for rain and thunder, for the seasons harmony, for our lives, for all creation, sing we our joyful praise to thee. For the world we raise our voices, for the home that gives us birth. In our joy we sing, returning home to our pilgrim hills of earth.
And if you'll join me in our covenant. Goodwill is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And now we're going to sing out our children to their classes.
Good morning. I am not David. I am Margaret Drinkwine, your immediate past president and perennial board member. And yes, I'm on my 6th year. It is a pleasure to be up here and introducing the offering. Haven't we had an amazing summer of pulpit guests? I mean, usually in the summer, I'm kind of an old brag Unitarian who wants to take the summers off. I look at the schedule every week and go, oh, I don't want to miss that one. I don't miss that one. I've had the pleasure of moderating with Reverend Jacobs before and was really looking forward to seeing him again today. 3 Sundays a month, we share our collection plate with a community organization that represents our values. The other Sundays, our collection goes to our general budget. Many of you have noticed, if you've been here every week, that the number of boxes in the lobby are going down. Our elevator is getting installed. We have our new HVAC system. Plus, we've had the added expense of some of our pulpit guests who've come from quite a distance away. So there are a number of needs for the general budget that continue even in the summer. So I'd encourage you to give even above your pledge. And if you're like me and you like to travel light, you can do it with your cell phone. If you don't want to download the app, you can do it through our website. I can actually make a donation on my cell phone faster than I can write a check. So if you forgot your checkbook, you can still give. The offering will be given and gratefully received.
And if you'll read with me. We dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community, to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and to create change toward a just and compassionate society.
Well, what I want to do today with you, instead of a traditional sermon, is share a few excerpts from a book I published last fall, a book of essays that some people have responded to and have seen and read. Dory and Janet, of course, they're both credited in the credits. And it's interesting how it came about. Much of my adult life, I've been pastoring Christian churches in the United Church of Christ as such. And I was pastoring one such church over in KCK. Generally, I don't take very explicit political policy stances in sermons, but I get a little edgier sometimes in my pastor's columns in the church newsletter. And I have a good friend. He's still a very good friend, very conservative, whereas I'm very liberal. And he would confront me every once in a while over something I said in one of these columns. And one day he came into the office and he looked at me, he sat down, he said, "You never say anything good about America." And you know, at that moment, I couldn't think of a damn thing I had said good about America. But I think really it was a matter of what he thought was good was not necessarily what I thought was good, and vice versa. At least I hope I'm not misrepresenting him or me in that. But about that time then, a person of the religious right who was writing a column for the local neighborhood newspaper quit writing the column. And I thought, well, maybe I'll write a column. So I contacted the publisher and editor and proposed writing a regular column exploring the interface between faith and our political culture, or political culture in general. So I started doing that. I did it every 2 weeks for 8 years. And of course, when you write that many columns, I went far and wide. Many of them you wouldn't view as exploring the interface between faith and political culture. So anyway, that's what I would want to do today. Some of the essays are very hard-hitting political, but I'm not really sharing any of those today, but I'll share some excerpts from several of the essays. I'm not trying to sell the book. I didn't bring any copies. Thank you, Anthony. Always a delight to hear you. I'm going to apologize, though. I think I'm going to skip over my essay that laments the lack of humor in religious hymns. So, here's one I wrote in 2010. This is most of it. I'm not sharing every word of the essays. It's titled, "Want to Go to a Movie?" I want to see the new Mel Gibson movie, Edge of Darkness. I know some of my liberal friends will think it's cultural betrayal and a sick waste of money, and maybe they're right, but maybe not. When John Wayne died in 1979, the liberal Chicago-based columnist Mike Royko wrote a panegyric to him, although Royko himself wasn't at all sympathetic to Wayne's politics. Royko told about a falling out he had had with a liberal friend who couldn't understand why Royko liked John Wayne movies. After all, John Wayne was naively conservative, a supporter of the Vietnam War, and especially insensitive to America's shortcomings. Royko's liberal friend argued that John Wayne stood for everything that was wrong. He glorified war, violence, justice by the gun, male chauvinism, simple-minded solutions, and even racism in the casual way he shot down Indians. Royko conceded that his friend was right about John Wayne. "But I still like John Wayne," wrote Royko. "His movies make me feel good." In his eulogy to the Duke, Royko wrote, "I never went to a John Wayne movie to find the philosophy to live by or to absorb a profound message. I went for the simple pleasure of spending a couple of hours seeing the bad guys lose." Well, once I became politically and socially informed myself, I too was put off by John Wayne's politics, but I still had a secret liking for his on-screen persona. As a rule, he played honorable, albeit not always admirable characters with variations, but his blustery self was always a delight to watch in any case. I find myself that way now with Mel Gibson. Yes, his recent anti-Semitic paranoia is nutty and despicable. His drunken Jew-baiting in a confrontation with a policeman was a great disappointment. His gory, blood-in-your-face Stations of the Cross Jesus story in The Passion of the Christ displays an unpalatable doctrine of God that Christianity probably should have jettisoned a long time ago. And in his movies, as Richard Corliss in Time magazine said, he's often the haunted hero who solves problems by killing people. A lot like John Wayne. I'm quite liberal in my cultural and political views, but there are some conservative actors I still like to watch. Mel Gibson is one. How about his steely resolve in Mad Max? Or his sorrow-saturated recklessness in Lethal Weapon? The heroic doomed-to-failure fight for freedom in Braveheart? The impetuous brooder in Hamlet? Cool, huh? I'm sure there are conservatives out there who still like to watch Sean Penn, George Clooney, Jodie Foster, or Susan Sarandon, even though they're all liberal activists. That has to be okay. And you know, it might not be all that terribly different from enjoying a Thanksgiving dinner or family reunion with one's politically, religiously, or morally wayward relatives. My glassy-eyed, whiskey-smelling Uncle Josh, not his real name or relationship, was often present and always graciously tolerated at the family get-togethers. My weirdly fundamentalist cousin Richard, not his real name or relationship, showed a contagious sense of humor at holiday gatherings, even though no one could stomach his narrowest brand of religion. Then there was the Jehovah's Witnesses' cousin, testing everyone's patience with his incessant attempts to engage in religious debate. And then the other uncle, who would show up periodically for a few days when on the lam in some other state. Cheats, drunks, racists, dropouts, criminals, cultists, braggarts, loopy liberals, cockeyed conservatives. Most families have a few and still find ways to include them, even appreciate whatever kind of charm they might have. The philosopher Richard Rorty celebrated that our modern advanced societies had achieved something quite remarkable in history, namely societies that managed to get along and run themselves more or less well with great diversity. That spirit of openness to differences, mutual tolerance, and shared community manifests itself in our everyday lives. So there's no reason a politically liberal film lover can't enjoy the artistic work of a politically conservative actor, and vice versa. Having said all this, having offered a rationale for why I like Mel Gibson movies, what I have to offer my right-wing, Sarah Palin fawning, gun rights touting, jingoistic, regressive conservative friends and readers is this invitation. Want to go to a movie? One of the things I tried to do in a number of columns was hold up people in certain roles. There are certain roles that get quite a bit of honor and notoriety and celebrity. Actors and actresses, of course, very good athletes, and the military is often lifted up and honored. But there are many, many people that involved in everyday care that keep our lives moving along, our activities lubricated, if you will. This essay is an ode to innkeepers. I don't mean the CEOs and upper management of international hotels, however essential they are. This is an ode to the public servants in our world's countless hotels, motels, hostels, auberges, Gasthäuser, ryokans, B&Bs, the day and night managers, desk clerks, room attendants, concierges, door persons, and so on. Few things are more important than the quality of service from innkeepers. Travelers sometimes overlook this. I began this column right after taking a room in the Comfort Inn and Suites of Hays, Kansas. The clerk was friendly and professional. I'm finishing up this column in a major international hotel in Denver, and the courtesy and attentiveness of the personnel here are as good as anywhere. I'm sure Innkeepers, outside the earshot of the public, have their own sets of cynical attitudes, snide comments, and jokes at the foibles of us travelers. Pastors have theirs about parishioners. Teachers have theirs about students, cops about civilians, and so on. That's part of the backstage of a service profession. But everywhere in the world, innkeepers are generally hospitable and quick and seemingly pleased to accommodate the traveler. Now, of course, quality hospitality can be a moneymaker, so we could be cynical about it and suspect all the cheerful attention is nothing more than good business. And certainly I've encountered a few surly innkeepers who seem to want to be someplace else. But I've very rarely had the impression that an innkeeper felt annoyed or resentful at having to see to some need or desire of mine. And I've enjoyed the indulgence of innkeepers in Mexico, Ireland, Canada, Israel, Italy, France, Switzerland, and other countries, as well as many of the United States. There was the innkeeper in Varanasi, India, who was apologetic that a monkey had eaten through the internet cable. There was no reason to doubt his sincerity. There was the innkeeper in a Japanese ryokan who cheerfully got me a Western chair for my back, aching from constantly sitting on the floor. In front of the Tokyo Hilton, I watched a rather petite doorwoman every day cheerfully lifting every traveler's heavy suitcase. In India, indeed, the service was often overly solicitous in the quest probably for tips in that land of poverty and low incomes. But even in Japan, where tipping was not expected, sometimes rejected, the cheerfulness of the service is striking. In the Gospel of Luke, the Christian Gospel of Luke, Jesus tells the parable of a man who is beaten and robbed and left for dead along the road between Jerusalem and Jericho. A priest passes by, deliberately avoiding the fallen man. A Levite does the same. Then a traveling Samaritan sees the man, stops and tends to the victim's wounds. The Good Samaritan has to go on about his own business. So what does he do? He leaves the man in the care of someone else, an innkeeper. One more, shortened a bit. This is from an essay titled, Kicking the God Habit. A lot of people should stay away from God. Of course, this is not literally possible since there is no place where God ain't. Like the alcoholic who has to ignore the bottle in a friend's home or the drinks available on a restaurant menu, some people need to pretend God just isn't there. There are people who should not indulge in God's presence because they can't handle it. Books criticizing religion have been popular in recent years, and then in the essay I review the arguments of Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, whom the press labeled the New Atheists. The New Atheist argument reminds me of the traditional temperance argument that the problem with alcohol abuse is not abuse, but alcohol itself. As the argument goes, alcohol consumption itself is viewed as the culprit because without consumption there would be no drunkenness and no alcoholism. And both the New Atheists and the temperance people have a certain logic. For sure, if one remains absolutely a teetotaler, one will never have a drinking problem. Likewise, no religious participation, no abuse in the name of religion. I'm not ready to embrace the argument of the New Atheists any more than I have of the temperance people. But the New Atheists have a point that has a parallel in the world of drink. Many alcoholics realize they can't drink at all. What is needed, perhaps, is for some people to realize they can't handle God. If you can't indulge in God without becoming an intolerant, judgmental, narrow-minded jerk, if you start thinking you should carry a sign saying God hates someone, or that natural disasters are the result of sin, or that people who don't believe what you do are going to hell, or that there is some sinner or infidel you need to kill, please stay away from God. Abstain. Join a Believers Anonymous group or something. Now, I realize alcoholics have a serenity prayer, and they appeal to a higher power. That won't do for the God-addicted. But you could find an atheist sponsor to call when you feel tempted to pray. Like a Gideon Bible, it might be a good idea to keep one of the new atheist books by the bedside. And whenever necessary, whisper this little mantra: to whom it may concern, grant me the serenity to keep my distance from you, the courage to stand on my own feet, and the wisdom to know the difference between faith and hatred. There you have a few of those bits. Thank you. Thank you for your time and attention.
And if you'll stand as you are able and join us on our song, For All That Is Our Life.
And praise for all that is a gift which we are called to use to build the common good and to make our own days glad. For needs which others serve, we sing our thanks and give for work and its rewards, for hours of rest and love, we come with praise and thanks for all that is our life. For sorrow we must bear, for failures, pain, and loss, for each new thing we learn, for fearful hours that pass, we come with praise and thanks for all that is our life. For all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise for all our lives a gift which we are called to use to build a common good and to make our own days glad.
Well, let me close with a few words from another essay of mine from that book. And probably most of us here are old enough to remember the movie As Good As It Gets from 1997 with Jack Nicholson and Helen Hunt and Greg Kinnear. And I've titled the column Carol to Melvin, and she was named Carol. The cantankerous one was Melvin. And I quoted her, "Try not to ruin everything by being you," she says at one point in the movie. So, one of my favorite movies is As Good As It Gets. An obsessive-compulsive writer, Melvin, a victimized gay artist, Simon, and an impoverished single mother, waitress, Carol, work out a shared life of mutual care in spite of great differences. It shows flawed people, sometimes with more, sometimes with less sensitivity, reaching out to one another, adjusting to each other. There is a wonderful irony in As Good As It Gets. The obsessive-compulsive Melvin, in a room full of patients waiting for their appointments with a psychiatrist, asks rhetorically, "What if this is as good as it gets?" And the film's answer, it seems to me, is no, it gets better when flawed people learn to live together and share the costs.
May a song of peace be yours, may a song of hope be mine.